Welcome, everybody. Thanks for your patience this morning. I am Linda McDonell with Vancouver Island University. Previously the BC Regional Innovation Chair for Aboriginal Early Childhood Development. I recently retired and now am adjunct with Vancouver Island University, VIU. And my colleague will also introduce herself.
I'm Grace Elliott-Nielsen, and my traditional name is Tiakanat. I've been with Tillicum House Friendship Center for the past 40 years.
Before we start today, we'd like to acknowledge and thank our funders. As you know, this is an Urban Aboriginal Knowledge Network webinar. We'd like to thank the funders, Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. The BC Regional Innovation Chair for AACD at VIU and Tillicum Lelum Aboriginal Friendship Center also want to thank the UAKN for supporting this project work that we'll be talking to you about this morning. Grace, you take over here.
Okay, Tillicum House has been involved with childcare for many years and realized we needed to move further ahead with that and work with the university and the school district. And the areas we were most concerned about was the residential school and the colonization and the attitudes of the fear towards education from many of the parents and children. So we did work together and develop a curriculum to address some of these issues, and we started off by having elders come in and do some of the training with the staff, and looked at the Harlem Children's Zone way of working with children in their areas, and proceeded on to knowing that children need to feel that they belong and that they're connected and that there's trust, and that needed to happen with the parents as well. So we worked on establishing a relationship with the parents and children, and together working with them. So it's, to this date, has been quite successful, and believe that it needs to continue to carry on.
One of the things that in our early discussions we realized that by really working on some of those early transitions, most particularly the transition from early childhood, whether children were at home or in childcare settings, transitioning from those settings into kindergarten would be really helpful in setting the stage for some of those relationships and really strong relationships that we want to happen early, so that parents are engaged, fully engaged in their child's education and feel really safe in the school system. Oh, the slideshow cut out. Sorry, I think we're okay now. Yes, apologies. A few technical things happening here. One of the first things we did as part of this overall transitions, looking at transitions from early childhood to kindergarten, was to undertake a literature review. And this was funded by Tillicum, Aboriginal Friendship Center, and the Coast Salish Employment Training Society. And we looked at all of the literature, both research and reports and documents that had been developed, as well as some curriculum that had been developed both in Canada and elsewhere about the importance of healthy transitions from early childhood to kindergarten. And that was the first piece of work. We also then moved on to conduct some interviews with organizations around the province and made some recommendations so that we could help to inform the work that Tillicum was doing with respect to really ensuring that we were meeting the needs of children and the professionals that are providing care. The transitions literature describes a number of things, and what you'll see on the slides here, or the slide here, is just a very quick overview. This is the background information, I should say, to this second transitions, which is the UAK-funded project. It indicated research that identified the importance of early childhood experiences to healthy and holistic early childhood development, and most significantly, we focused on how was that unique and even more critical for Aboriginal children, given the context of their experiences, as Grace has noted, their experience with residential schools and colonization. So how could we create transition programs that would really begin to address that? Also looking at the effect of transitions from early childhood settings to kindergarten. So in what ways are they important, and what could we do to improve them? Also really noted in those interviews the existing fragmentation of services across the sectors, between particularly the early childhood system and the school system, and the effects of that fragmentation on both transitions between systems and ultimately on child development. That we also made a series of recommendations around the importance of relationship building and trust, information sharing, to identify ways to support family and community and the importance of those supports, the culture and language of the families that are involved in programs, and ways, the really important ways of aligning curriculum and teaching strategies. So how could we get those two systems working more closely together, both in terms of curriculum and relationship building and cultural relevance, etc. And also the school cultures being very different in the two systems. So there were recommendations around that, and the hub model approaches, which is the wraparound services. So while you might provide childcare in a program, there would be a number of other services that would wrap around that childcare program to provide supports to children and to families and to professionals as well. When we completed that project, one of the things in our discussions we realized was that really we had looked at what did the literature say about the importance of transitions and about the importance of the early years, but we didn't actually look at what transition programs actually exist for Aboriginal children and families in BC. And what do we know about them? Where they do exist, what do we know about them? And so that was, Tillicum Lelum submitted a proposal to the UAKN, and we were funded for a small project to really begin to look at that and do a scan of those programs. And some of the things that we did around that, we developed some criteria, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, that would help us identify those programs that would be most relevant to Aboriginal children and families. We wanted to do a website search, so because it was a relatively small project, we needed to find ways to be efficient and effective in identifying these resources and services. We then, once we generated a list, we identified those organizations, and then we contacted them to determine their willingness to participate and to identify potential informants within each of those organizations. Of course, we had consent from all of those participants, and we distributed questionnaires to them in advance of the interview, and then our student researcher contacted each of those organizations and conducted the interview and was the scribe for the data. In some cases, actually organizations also sent us information in writing, but in most cases it was done through interview. We went through a process of pulling all that information together, doing some categorizing and theming, and then developed a series of response themes and some recommendations to provide us guidance as we moved into this next phase. So the criteria I mentioned earlier, we wanted to talk to programs that focused on supporting children as they transition from childcare or home settings into kindergarten. And we wanted to ensure that those programs were, that really we were talking to programs that provided services to Aboriginal children and families in particular. And we were also focusing on urban and off-reserve programs, although we did end up on the recommendation from many of our respondents, we did end up contacting a local First Nations community that had developed some programs over a number of years that provided some good information for us. The questions were around the program objectives, what kind of models did they use, what were the key tasks and functions of that program, who was involved in it, and what kinds of work were they doing as part of those roles. So what were their roles and responsibilities, and what kinds of supports were in place for the people that were delivering the program. What methods of outreach were they using to ensure that they were reaching the families that would benefit from the service? And were there evaluations available? So we weren't asking people to actually comment on strengths and challenges. We wanted to provide or access information that had already been done as part of this scan. And we also asked them about information regarding other programs that might fit the criteria that we had set. The regions that you'll see on this slide, these were all the regions that we spoke with organizations, usually one in each region, although there may have been some regions that had more than one organization. So you can see it's a fairly good coverage of the province. There's, we talked to people and we tried to be as thorough as we could in trying to cover the various regions of British Columbia. So what did we find from this research? One of the things that struck us right away was the things that the organizations were talking about really were underscoring or supporting what we had found in much of the literature that we'd looked at in the earlier project, in the Transitions 1 project. Each of the informants we talked to described some very unique and valuable aspects of their programs, the unique ways that they were working with children and families, often with very little resourcing. Many of their responses, in fact, I would guess most, were really emphasizing relationship building and getting children ready, the importance of their program in terms of getting children ready for school, and of course their families as well, helping the families to really get ready as well for this new experience. All informants commented about the importance of formalizing collaboration between local district staff and other programs and services, that this would really strengthen what was out there. Often the programs were really responding quite spontaneously to some of the needs in the communities in which those organizations were, and that they felt that the relationships between early childhood, wherever those children were in those early childhood settings, and the school district, that they would really benefit from actually making sure that those programs were more formalized and part of the regular school offerings, and that there would be an expectation of early childhood and kindergarten programs working together. Where that was happening clearly was where people were really going above and beyond and doing these extra kinds of programs and providing extra services as they might be as they might be needed and wouldn't necessarily be always part of their job. And this was the case for both early childhood and for kindergarten teachers. There were a couple of programs that were spoken about by many, saying, in terms of them providing some really good services to help children make that transition in a very concrete way. And one was Aboriginal Head Start programs that are offered around British Columbia. Those programs are both on reserve and off. The programs that people were talking about with the organizations that we interviewed were primarily the off-reserve programs. And also the Strong Start that we have here in British Columbia, that is a program that involves both parents and children coming into the schools early on, from the age of 2 and up, and doing a variety of activities with an early childhood educator there to supervise, and the parents are involved. So some really excellent ways of beginning to help parents with that transition. The one thing we found that people commented about with the Strong Start, and certainly from my own experiences in other areas, there was some concern about whether the Strong Start programs were picking up the Aboriginal families, that were they really accessing those programs as much as the schools and others would hope. And I think there is some evaluation work being done around that specifically. And then there was a whole variety, I won't list those off, you can see them in front of you. There was a whole variety of programs that were smaller programs that were a part of either the early childhood, mostly early childhood programs, but sometimes the kindergarten programs as well, or that these were attached to the organizations that we were talking to. So a whole variety, not specifically that were providing specific services for transition, but that would be seen to begin developing those relationships. That would be so important as children move into the school system. Once we pulled all that data together, we developed some recommendations, and if you have the opportunity to see the 2 reports, and I'll give you the website at the end of the presentation where you can actually go and see both of those reports. These were some of the things that came up both in Transitions 1 and were reinforced in Transition 2, and that we believed would be really important in terms of really supporting Tillicum Lelum to develop their programs in a way that would ensure that they were meeting the needs of children and families, and indeed professionals that were working with children. So again, the focus on relationship building was very strongly stated in both by all informants. Strengthening communication across all stakeholders, including families, educators, teachers, administrators, and how important all of those relationships were to ensuring that programs were really good quality programs and providing the kinds of resources that families really needed. It was also really key in the literature and in the interviews that family-centeredness was important. And of course, in Aboriginal First Nations families, the notion of culture as well, the culture-centeredness was really important in terms of every aspect of development. So not just program activities, but how do we do outreach? How do we plan? How can we plan in a way that's collaborative? How can we develop programs in a way that's collaborative? And how can we assess children and evaluate programs in ways that are responsive to the communities with whom we're working? This would be certainly true for all communities, but most particularly for Aboriginal and First Nations communities. Also using culturally inclusive approaches in all aspects of the programs. So making sure that there was an emphasis on the local languages, the local culture, the local traditions and knowledge, ways of knowing, and their practices. Also emphasizing play-based learning experiences, and for those of that are coming from an early childhood perspective, we really accept, and I think kindergarten teachers as well these days really accept that the play-based approach to learning is by far the most effective with very young children, and so we needed to really ensure that we were enhancing those opportunities to build a strong foundation for holistic and healthy child development. Also, developing collaborative professional development opportunities was seen as really critical for ECEs and teachers. So that we bring them together in ways that will encourage them to learn together, work together, and build those all-important relationships across the systems. Also reinforcing the idea of school readiness. And this was sort of an interesting shift because a lot of the literature talks about getting children ready for school. A lot of the practice, early childhood and kindergarten practice, is we think about how do we best get children ready to enter the school system. But instead, we tried to flip that because we were hearing it's not just about getting children ready, it's more about getting schools ready for children so that they can be responsive to the needs of children, no matter where they come from, and certainly in this case, from the First Nations and Aboriginal communities, for sure. And also, lastly, the notion of formalizing all of what we learned into program and school policy, because again, a lot of what was happening was informal and was responding to parents, but there wasn't a policy direction or expectation that all of these things would be happening in early childhood and in kindergarten. We saw that the early childhood educators were doing lots of outreach to kindergarten teachers, then where those relationships were sound, they had really good benefit from that and good quality, positive transitions. Anything, Grace, that you'd like to say here around the recommendations?
Excuse me. The relationships became very important, and with the program and that we had last summer was exceptional in developing those relationships because the parents came almost every day to school and helped with the children and worked with the teachers and the early childhood educators and have continued that relationship. As a result, the teachers that are teaching the children now in kindergarten have said that they're far more advanced than the other kindergarten children. So that relationship has carried on as well with the families from last year, and they continue to meet on a regular basis and have support from the coordinator and the early childhood educator. And we're now working on the next year's students and parents to go through the same process. But we're not letting the students and the parents to sort of go by the wayside, because it's really important that they continue to have that involvement in the school past, if we're looking at like the Harlem Children's Zone, where you go from kindergarten to university. So we're hoping to continue that relationship, and as a result are having all the parents from last year and the ones coming up this year having a celebration with their children in the next month, I think. And so it's important to continue those relationships. That's where it's all about, because as I had said before, and Linda's mentioned, there's a lot of fear around education, and that I know that involved in some of the advisory committees, the teachers always say that the parents will never come into the classrooms and don't really encourage their children to be involved if there's other things to do. That it isn't that important because it's a fearful place to be. So I think it's really important that we continue to move past that fear base and develop that trust and to continue that relationship building and to involve the teachers and all the other organizations in the community to support it and to work with it as well.
One of the things that really came up in the interviews in terms of what people thought was really important was that whoever is working with the Aboriginal children and families that are coming in really need to have cultural competence, and I think that's something that is becoming really quite talked about a lot, and that competence is so critical, so that people really are sensitive and responsive to the children that are in their programs. And so one of the things that we'll be working on over the next while will be with the school district. There is a project that we are in the proposal development stage of, involving the school district and VIU and Tillicum to continue these transition programs that Tillicum offered last year, to offer them over time, and create a research plan that will allow us to evaluate the programs, and so that we can create a new model for evaluating Aboriginal programs, or evaluating programs from an Aboriginal perspective. And also another thing that came up in the literature is around the importance of culturally appropriate assessment of child development. And so one of the things VIU and Tillicum in the school district will be hoping to work on in the next couple of years is really strengthening those child assessments so that they also are culturally appropriate and relevant to the children and families that are using those programs. And also, there will be an opportunity in this continued work between the school district and Tillicum and VIU to really begin thinking about how can we formalize protocols and policy across all of those sectors, the early childhood sector, the school district, Tillicum, Lelum, and other agencies that may be providing these types of programs for children and families. So there would be things that we can learn in our work that can be shared with others.
And I just wanted to add again how important the sense of belonging is. So very, very important. And that's been a downfall, I think, where Aboriginal people didn't have a sense of belonging in the community. So within that cultural sensitivity, we need to look at how can we share the knowledge and wisdom equally, whereby whatever Aboriginal people bring forward and the work that they do in the programs is as important as any of the other curriculum. And it's important for Aboriginal people to feel a sense of belonging so that they can acknowledge and trust and accept the other components of the curriculum.
Really important. It's something that we've talked about in early childhood a great deal, and that's the idea of children and families seeing themselves in the programs so that they see things that are that connect them to their own lives and experiences. And so this will be an opportunity to really begin to develop that. So that's the end of the presentation. I have provided for you here the website, the viu.ca, Chair ACD website, where you can find the documents and download them. There's also my own email, and Grace's is the education@Tillicum Lelum. And the other name you see there is Tony Schachtel, and he's a program coordinator with Tillicum Lelum, and he's another person that you could talk to. On the website, there also will be information about Danielle Alphonse, who is the new BC Regional Innovation Chair for Aboriginal Early Childhood Development here at Vancouver Island University. And if you want to connect with Danielle to find out more about the work that we're doing, there would be a good opportunity to do that, and you can do that through the website. Her email information would be there as well. So thank you for listening, and if there is any questions, we will do our best to answer them for you.